Okay, young scholars. I'm gonna try something different for chapter 3. I don't have the little graphic organizer of plot points. I can make that available later if it's helpful, but I meant to check with you, get some feedback as to whether you prefer that or if I just go directly using the study guide over the section. I'm going to do that. I'm going to go over chapter 3 and then I'm going to go over something and give you a task related to it. All right, so I'm going to kind of go quickly over chapter 3. All right, so I had asked you, I just wrote footwear and discuss. In the beginning, last time I talked about how we basically, at the beginning of the chapter, Billy and Weary and the scouts have been captured. Weary and Billy got captured themselves. It opens with a very dirty paragraph, but fortunately, you won't look up the word that makes it dirty. On page 52, though, the second paragraph uh, draws attention or is an example of one of the themes that is unusual about the book that I'm going to ask you to kind of track as we go forward. And this is referencing the dog. It begins with the dog. The dog, who had sounded so ferocious in the winter distances, was a female German shepherd. She was shivering, her tail was between her legs. She had been borrowed that morning from a farmer. She had never been to war before. She had no idea what game was being played. Her name was Princess. Hopefully you noticed something about the syntax there, and I'm going to not touch on that right now. But one of the things Vonnegut's done here is shifted the point of view to that of the dog, and kind of looks at something. We all know what war is. The dog does not, though. Looks at it from a very foreign perspective to kind of give it maybe new meaning for us, which some people would argue is the goal of any art. You paint a bowl of fruit to make us think differently about the bowl of fruit to give us a new perspective on it. Okay, I'm going quickly through a pretty big idea there. Anyway, the Tralfamadorians are a much larger example of this. They're giving Billy Pilgrim, or they will be giving Billy Pilgrim, a new perspective on time, on death, that relates back to the so it goes thing. All right, but here it's just a quick little shift to the point of view of the dog. It gives the dog a full paragraph. Of course, her name is Princess, which is going to be one of those things that returns. Uh, I had mentioned last time something called point connects. It's just Vonnegut is going to use imagery, like I said last time, Adam and Eve, more than once, and I want to keep track of that, even if it's not in the study guides, because it connects somehow in ways I'll ask you about different parts of the book. All right, so I'm kind of skipping forward to the past the Adam and Eve thing that I was talking about, which which was inspired by the shiny boots. Talking about footwear, it is going to be Roland Weary that loses his boots. Then he made Weary sit down in the snow and take off his combat boots, which he gave to the beautiful boy. That's the little one that was compared to Eve. He gave Weary the boots, the boy's clogs. So Weary and Billy were both without decent military footwear now, and they had to walk for miles and miles with Weary's clogs clacking, with Billy bobbing up and down, crashing into Weary from time to time. Excuse me, Billy would say, or I beg your pardon. They were brought at last to a stone cottage at a fork in the road. Okay, so Billy still has his shoes on from his father's funeral, the dress shoes that he would wear with a suit, and they're missing a heel. So there's that repeated image of him bobbing up and down, up and down. Real quickly, in the background on page 54, 3 inoffensive bangs came from far away. They came from German rifles. The 2 scouts who had ditched Billy and Weary had just been shot. They had been lying in ambush for Germans. They had been discovered and shot from behind. Now they were dying in the snow, feeling nothing, turning the snow to the color of raspberry sherbet. So it goes. So Roland Weary was the last of the 3 musketeers. So you have um, the only skilled characters are not named. The only ones that could be played by maybe action stars, the ones that knew what they were doing, and they're killed sort of in the background, and the idiots kind of stumble along and survive. Um, Before we get to Billy being thrown in the shrubbery, we take a time jump. Billy jumps forward in time to 1967. Um, all right, he was 44 years old on page 57. He's passing out of his office. He drives through what they refer to as Ilium's Black Ghetto. Um, this is a reference to some of the race riots of the 1960s, um, and they're just sort of in the background. There's very little comment on it. Billy doesn't do anything when asked to engage. That might be one of the points of it. On page 60, Billy has to give a speech at the Lions Club. Actually, bottom of page 59, the speaker of the Lions Club meeting was a major in the Marines. He said that Americans had no choice but to keep fighting in Vietnam until they achieved victory, until the communists realized that they could not force their way of life on weak countries. The major had been there on 2 separate tours of duty. He told of many terrible and many wonderful things he had seen. He was in favor of increased bombings, of bombing North Vietnam back to the Stone Age if it refused to see reason. Billy was not moved to protest the bombing of North Vietnam, did not shudder about the hideous things he himself had seen bombing do. He was simply having lunch with the Lions Club, of which he was past president now. Okay, so that kind of, there's sort of throughout the novel, chapter 3 begins with the Germans and the dog were engaged in a military operation which had an amusingly self-explanatory name, a human enterprise, which is seldom described in detail, whose name alone, when reported as news or history, gives many war enthusiasts a sort of post-coital satisfaction. It is, in the imagination of combat's fans, the divinely listless love play that follows up the orgasm of victory. It is called mopping up. I'm connecting those 2 passages because they're a counterpoint of view, another way of perceiving things. The militaristic viewpoint is laced throughout the novel. Billy is not one to protest it. He's not a person here in middle age who takes up a cause and tries to change the world in any sort of a way. On page 60 is something that goes along with that, which is the quote he has hanging on the wall. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom always to tell the difference. Among the things Billy Pilgrim could not change were the past, the present, and the future. Very passive philosophy. Okay, on page 61, he went home for a nap after lunch. He was under doctor's orders to take a nap every day. The doctor hoped that this would relieve a complaint that Billy had. Every so often, for no apparent reason, Billy Pilgrim would find himself weeping. Nobody had ever caught Billy doing it. Only the doctor knew. It was an extremely quiet thing Billy did, and not very moist. Billy owned a lovely Georgian home in Ilium. He was rich as Croesus, something he had never expected to be, not in a million years. So this is Billy in midlife. He is clearly not doing well. He's crying in the middle of the day. This is where I'm jumping over question number 2. This is when he goes home, and again, Vonnegut describes with humor something that is kind of tragic. This is dark humor or black comedy. On page 62, one of my favorite quotes, Billy took off his trifocals and his coat and his necktie. This is middle-aged Billy at home. And his shoes, and he closed the Venetian blinds and then the drapes, and he lay down on the outside of the coverlet, but sleep would not come. Tears came instead. They seeped. Billy turned on the magic fingers, and he was jiggled as he wept. Ridiculous image, a middle-aged man alone, home in the middle of the day, crying and jiggling on his bed. Just above that is a description of all the technology in this house. There was a double bed with a clock radio on a table beside it. Also on the blanket were controls for the electric blanket and a switch to turn on a gentle vibrator, which was bolted to the springs of the box mattress. The trade name of this vibrator was Magic Fingers. It was the doctor's idea too. Okay, then he gets a visit from some, what they're referring to very politically incorrectly as cripples. And one of the connections we might make is that this is similar, again, to that sort of children's crusade idea. Someone is taking advantage of the weak, the young, and the innocent, making money off of these children that have physical problems. They're selling magazines. We jump back to the war. Weary's eyes were tearful on page 64. Also, Weary was crying because of the horrible pains in his feet. The hinged clogs were transforming his feet into blood puddings. Right? He had lost his shoes, basically because shoes are very important. You learn that when you watched Forrest Gump. Lieutenant Dan said, "Keep your feet dry." Over on page 65 is another image that's going to repeat. At the top of the page where it begins, Billy found the afternoon stingingly exciting. There was so much to see. Dragon's teeth, killing machines, corpses with bare feet that were blue and ivory. So it goes. Bobbing up and down, Billy beamed lovingly at a bright lavender farmhouse that had been spattered with machine gun bullets. Standing in its cockeyed doorway was a German colonel. With him was his unpainted whore. Billy crashed into Weary's shoulder, and Weary cried out sobbingly, "Walk right, walk right." They were climbing a gentle rise now. When they reached the top, they weren't in Luxembourg anymore. They were in Germany. A motion picture camera was set up at the border to record this fabulous recording. Now this references question number 2. This is what the answer is. Why was Billy thrown into shrubbery? They were staging a photograph. It has to do with creating propaganda. They're taking a picture that makes it look like the Americans are losing. They're going to publish that. They're creating a narrative or a story. Like Weary's version of the war story, it is not related to the truth. Like Mary O'Hare, Mary O'Hare's concern was that the book would serve as propaganda. This is the connection to actual propaganda. And the Tralfamadorians, like I said, have to do with the theme of perception, how we perceive things, and this is a manipulation of perception. Also important on page 67, you might have missed it. None of the people who could hear him were actually from his regiment except for Roland Weary. That's talking about Wild Bob. And Weary wasn't listening. All Weary could think about was the agony in his feet. I'm skipping down. This is about Wild Bob. If you're ever in Cody, Wyoming, there's that answer. And he's screaming about how he's going to barbecue whole steers. He said all this while staring into Billy's eyes. He made the inside of poor Billy's skull echo with balderdash. "God be with you, boys," he said. And that echoed and echoed. And then he said, "If you're ever in Cody, Wyoming, just ask for Wild Bob." I was there. So was my old war buddy, Bernard V. O'Hare. Question, who is the I? Well, you can't answer because I'm doing a video recording. The I is Kurt Vonnegut, Bernard V. O'Hare. This is Vonnegut's little moment of metafiction reminding you that he's a real person, and these are his experiences, but Billy is a fictional character that we're following through the war. All right, Wild Bob is not going to make it. He dies. The war is nearly over on page 69. Getting to page 70 is where I want to do a little example of something I'm going to ask you to do. I'm going to stop this one because I'm running out of time, and I'm going to make a second video just for that. All right. Hopefully I can do this all in time.